Hey everyone, Levi here at HammerFab. Today we're going to be showing you how to do some roll cage construction. Not the inside of the roll cage, but we're going to do some down bars that come off of our firewall brackets that we made in a previous video. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out on our YouTube channel. What we're going to be doing is basically the down bars that come out of the firewall, we're going to connect them to the chassis so it's real rigid, and then we're also going to connect them to the core support. We're going to incorporate inner fenders into these bars and also our billet hood hinges, so stay tuned. All right, so the first thing we need to make sure before we build any kind of roll bars is we need to make sure that our core support here from Classic Parts of America is bolted in nice and securely to the original sheet metal. So we've got it lined up on the body mounts on the chop and block chassis. They lined up perfect. And now we're just threading in some bolts on the bottom here, and we're gonna snug those up, and then we can start making some brackets. All right, so these are the hinges that we've decided to use. These are Ring Brothers billet aluminum airframe hinges, but they're not for a C10, okay? So these are for a Ford Falcon. What? Yeah, Ford Falcon billet hinges that work really good. I've been known to do this before where you use a non-conventional hinge on something custom. The way this hinge works and the small shape of it is gonna be perfect for our situation here with this C10 hood. I like to do something a little bit outside the box. I like to think a little bit different than everybody else is doing. I don't like to copy what everybody else is doing. I like to be a little bit original. I mean, that's part of why people love the work that we do. So, can't tell you exactly what we're gonna do yet, but stay tuned. This truck is laying frame right now, okay? Or laying rocker, whatever you wanna call it. The air ride suspension is all the way out. This is an extreme air ride chassis from Chop and Block. And we've got a I think it's a 29-inch tall tire in the front. So it's a 20-inch wheel with a 295 35 20. And so basically what we need to know is where in up and down relation this pad needs to be to the hood. But even, I know it's not going to be that low. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be that low. But even if it was, we want to give ourselves about a 1/2 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch of clearance to the top of the tire when it's all the way aired out. That way we know no matter what, it's never going to hit our hinge. But I'm pretty sure that that's going to be a pretty safe spot somewhere right in there. That's about where that hinge is going to live. Okay? And so then, if you can imagine it opening up, it's going to operate just about like that. And it's going to have a gas strut on it and everything. So it's going to be really nice. Except we're going to use black ones in the end. We got anodized black set coming, but we're going to use this one for mocking up. Once we figure out one side, all we have to do is copy it to the other side. And actually, we'll probably design that bracket and stuff in SolidWorks. We can take some measurements off of this to get that just right. And then we just have to mirror image them in SolidWorks. We don't even have to pattern that side. We just do it all in the computer, hit a button, send it. All right, we're ready to start designing these bars, the down bars that come off of the firewall brackets, down to the chassis, and up to the core support. So the next thing that we need, the next piece of the puzzle, is we need to figure out, kind of in our heads, like where do you want these bars to end up attaching to? Well, I know I want it attaching to the chassis for rigidity purposes, and I also want to attach it to this for rigidity and also just for aesthetics, because we're going to need some places to attach our inner splash pans to. So we know we got to clear the tire when it's fully aired out. So, and we know we got to have it attaching to the hinge. So we're going to come off of here somewhere and then probably down to the chassis, maybe right here. That would be a good spot that's completely out of the way of everything. We could go like basically here or maybe here. No, that's getting pretty close to the radiator, because if we do like a 3-inch radiator, that's going to be right in the way. So we don't want to do it down here. But we could do it here, but that's a really good spot right there. But we're gonna have to basically, we could either do a pretty straight bar right up to here and then have an angled bar going down, or we could bend this one and then have another bar coming off. I think I like the idea of going straighter and attaching to this first and then build off of that one going down. I like that better. I think that'll look better. That makes a nice seamless top here for inner splash pans and stuff. So what we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need to design a landing pad down here. Kind of like we did here, but it doesn't need to look that pretty because it's way down here around a bunch of stuff. It just needs to be beefy and removable. We're gonna have a couple of bolt flanges that bolt into the chassis, and then we'll do a pad up here. There again, we need to be completely out of the way of the radiator, and so we may need to make it land right here in this corner. And then you always want to check the other side to make sure that we can make two pads that are symmetrical. So I think maybe right here, let's see, I don't know, let's hold up this bar here and mock it up. So this is not the actual bar that we're going to be using, but we could do something about like that. Yeah, look at that. If we shoot straight down there, so if we did a pad right here on the core support, that's about what that bar could end up looking like. I think that looks pretty rad right there. Yeah. And then basically we could have an inner splash pan here, an inner splash pan there, depending on what we do with the hood, and then an inner splash pan basically going right down there. So even if this bar is at an angle, we just got to make sure that our hood hinge bracket is parallel coming off of this. So well, let's mess with some bars. Let's bend some up. And what we'll do first is we'll make a pattern bar. So don't worry about trying to nail it on your first bar. That was one of the things that always bugged me when I first started making roll cages, was I always thought I had to get it right the first time. Well, you do if you don't have a lot of money for roll cage tubing. But I always recommend getting a couple extra pieces of roll cage tubing so that you can make a pattern bar. And what we'll do is not worry about it being all one piece. We might be able to cut it and make some seams, and that way we can rotate the bars and get them looking exactly the way we want. And then we'll use that pattern bar to transfer the bends and the angles and everything to our real bar. And that way we can make two real bars and nail them the first time. All right, now we're just going to show you how to real quick make some patterns for these front mounting pads. I've decided not to get those laser cut just because they're pretty simple to make. We've got the materials here, and we need them in place, bolted down, so that we can keep rolling here. So basically I'm just going to get some chipboard. This is like 35 thousandths or maybe 30 thousandths chipboard. You can get that stuff at uline.com. But basically it's a pretty rigid but still flexible board that you can cut real crisply, make some accurate patterns. So I just start with a chunk of it, like a rectangle, and I'm going to use this upper straight edge and line it up with this upper straight edge, and then I'm going to move it over so that I have enough material to line it up with this edge. I like to play off of all those lines. Might as well. They're already there, and so we're just going to kind of loosely sketch a design on there. And now I look at other things. What can I utilize that's already there? Well, there's that hole that I think we can utilize, and it looks like it's about the right size for one of our Rivnuts that we're going to install. So Rivnut is a threaded insert that we're going to drill a hole, and in this case there's already a hole, so we might as well use it. Now there's not one on that side, but that's okay. We'll just build it off of this side, use that hole, and we'll just have to make a couple of other holes. So we'll probably have one like right about there, and the other one, well, once we establish where that hole is, so it's going to be right about, the holes are going to be in that line right there. So the other one, you want these two holes in alignment with each other, so the third hole is going to be right about there. So we'll just do 3 holes, and then that will, now you can make the bottom of it, you can make it angled or whatever, but I like to make it level like with the louvers. So we may need to trim that up a little bit down there. We might have to move this hole up a little bit. somewhere like that. So let's now just rough cut that. I just use 10 snips to cut this stuff. You don't have to, you can use scissors if you want. I mean, it's not that hard to cut. It's what I got laying around, so that's what we're going to use. Now, we'll get it closer, and then we'll hold it up there again. And just kind of double check a couple of things, like the parallelness to the louvers on the bottom. That's pretty close. I might trim it just a little bit. You can always change it once you get it in metal, but I'd like to just get the pattern dialed in. And that way I don't have to change it in the metal. Okay, so now what we want to do is we got to for sure leave a spot for our roll cage to land. It's going to be 1 5/8" tubing, so it's going to be about like that. And then you want to have plenty of room around the sides to get a bolt and a washer and a socket and a ratchet and everything in there. So don't crowd it too close to your tubing. So, but I think that's going to be okay. I think I'm going to adjust. No, that looks okay. Now we're just going to put some radiuses on these corners to make it look a little more professional. So then I'll just trim that down one more time. And then we'll sand the edges of the pattern so that they're real smooth, because this doesn't always make a real crisp edge. We're just going to kind of chop it off like that, get it close. That's going to be a radius in the end. So right now I'm just kind of loosely chopping that off. Trim about 1/8 of an inch off of there. Sometimes this stuff doesn't like to cut in a tight corner like that, so it's easier just to chop it off. Okay, so there's our main pad. Now see the edges aren't real smooth, so let's go smooth those out. We're going to fire up our Burr King sander here. It not only works good on metal, but works on cardboard. I'm just lightly pushing on it. I'm not trying to take off a whole lot because I don't want to change it too much. That straightens out the edge. We'll straighten out all the edges first. That one's already straight. Okay, and then we're going to round the corners. Smooth them out a little bit. Like that. And then I just kind of deburr the edges. Might seem silly to do this to cardboard, but you want to make a really accurate pattern, especially when you're doing stuff by hand, because we're not going to put this in the computer and make it perfect. We're gonna do it the old-fashioned way and whittle this thing out of some 3/16 plate. Okay, ready? Okay, so then we need a fine point Sharpie marker, which is what I think I had. Yeah, there we go. See? I'm going to see it one last time before we finalize that guy. I think I'm going to actually, well, if I can, I'm going to transfer this hole to the back side. Here, I couldn't get that circle all the way, so I'm going to use this circle template like that to round it out like that. And then you can use these little crosshairs and the edges that's the hole that already exists on the core support, so we want to make sure we get that in the right spot. Otherwise, it won't look right. So now what you can do is you can either just use a prick punch right there and transfer that right into the metal. I think we'll do that. So now I need to, this is on the back side because that's the side that I could trace. So I need to transfer these holes, and they don't necessarily need to be right there. You know, we're making up our own rules here. So what I do want is I want them to look evenly, so I'm going to find the center of that hole and transfer that line all the way over here. I'm using my finger as a guide, okay? Now I'm going to do the same thing on this one, and if you do that, it'll put that hole right in the middle of this radius. See how it did that? So, yeah. Okay, and then we'll bring it down here like that. We'll do the same thing on this one. I mean, we could put 4 fasteners in there. Let's do 4 fasteners since it's kind of a parallelogram. Is that a parallelogram? Yeah, that's a parallelogram because a trapezoid would have equal sides on 2 sides. It's not a trapezoid. So there's where the holes are going to go. We decided to do 4 of them. Okay, so now we're going to go get some metal, transfer this pattern to the metal, prick punch the punches so that we can get the holes centered up just perfect. And then we can cut them out, grind them, and we'll show you how to bolt them onto the core support. All right, now we got our template for our firewall, or I'm sorry, we got our template for our core support brackets for our roll cage. We sanded all the edges. Now we're going to transfer this to some steel, some thick steel. So I was originally thinking about doing it out of 3/16, but it's not really necessary, and I don't have any pieces big enough to do that out of right now. So we're going to use some of this 10 gauge. This was a piece that I had made for my Pole Max. This is an extra piece that we had from the laser cutter. So it looks nice, but it's just a scrap piece. We're going to cut it up and make it not nice. But it's going to be perfect for this stuff. So this is really thick. It's like 120 thousandths thick. So it'll be plenty beefy for what we're doing. It's got some straight edges that we can build off of. So I'm going to line that up right there and trace right around my pattern with a fine point Sharpie marker. Okay. And now I'm not going to move it, and I'm going to go get my center punch. Actually, you know what else we could do to make sure it doesn't move? Put a couple of neodymium magnets on it. Okay, then we'll use a center punch like this, a spring tool. Find the center of our holes. Oh, wait a minute, that's the wrong side. We want to start on the other side. We can still use that outline, but I don't want to use this side to determine where my holes are, because remember we made those better on this side. So I'm going to trace this side first, lining up that outer edge first so I don't have to cut that edge or grind that edge. You always want to save yourself as much work as possible. Okay. Now it's not going to move on us, so we can trace the outside. All right, now I can transfer the holes, because where these lines cross is where we actually want our holes to be. Things like ringing a bell. Okay, now we've got holes punched through it. Can you see that daylight through there? See, we've got holes punched through it. So now when we flip our pattern back over and line it up, line the outside edges up with our first drawing, our first transfer, we can stick that down. And now we have holes already that we know. See how far off the holes are? So if we would have used this side as our locating spot, the holes are far off from our actual marks that we had. So this is how you make a perfectly symmetrical pattern by hand. Boom. All right, now we're ready to make the landing pads that bolt to the chassis for our down bar to attach to. So once again, I'm just going to grab a chunk of chipboard, and I've got a game plan in my head kind of how I want to do this. So I think I'm going to make it come right off of this angle. So for the most part, it's going to be that angle, but it's going to overhang the frame a little bit, okay? So we've got the truck all the way aired out, so I don't have to worry about the sway bar ever contacting this pad, okay? Because it's never going to be driven this low. And so what I want to do is be able to bolt right into this flat part of this angled part of the chassis. So we're going to make a pad that comes off of there like that. But we don't, even though it's 1/8 inch, we don't want to just make a flat piece because under stress, that would just bend. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to bend a little gusset onto this piece. Or, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah. No, I don't want to do that. How do I want to do that? Let's see here. Nah, we'll just keep it simple. I'm not going to do gussets and bends and stuff, but I will still mount it to this angled part. Okay, so we're going to mount it to the angled part, but it really only needs to be a little bit wider than this frame rail, so we'll just make it equal distance wider to that frame and give it kind of a trapezoid parallelogram looking shape so it matches everything else. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm just going to start with the width. I know I want it wider than the frame is already. This is going to be kind of tricky to do because my finger didn't go that wide. See, that's almost wider than the frame. You want to make it wide enough so that you don't, I mean, you want to give yourself a nice landing pad for that cage to land on. Otherwise, you may not have enough real estate there to... I'm going to rough cut that down to the width that I want. And I just guessed on that width. It's not an exact measurement. Looks like about 2.5 inches. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just draw a line like that and a line like this. Same distance. And what that is, if you were in the computer, that would be called a construction line. So that's just something to help us finish drawing this thing out, okay? So then I'm going to do another construction line like this. I'm using my finger as a spacer off of both ends. And basically what that's going to do is create some points that I can connect the dots, connect those corners. Boom. Like that. Okay. Okay, now I'm gonna finish cutting this. Okay, so I drew those angles. I'm gonna trim those off. This is just for looks. Okay, we want it to look kind of geometric, and to me, angles, I love obtuse angles. I think they make it look tougher. Okay, so that's just the general shape. And that's gonna go right there. So now we're gonna have a bolt right about there and right about there. Okay, and then we round the corners a little bit, make it look professional. Those won't need much because they're just an obtuse angle. Roundy round. And now our cage is going to land, well, actually it'll be like an ellipse when it comes down there because of the angle. So it's going to land somewhere right in there. Okay. Now there's not much overhang on both sides, and most of the tube is going to be contacting right there, but that gives us a nice pad that we can unbolt. It's going to make that really beefy right there, and it's out completely out of the way of our radiator and everything right here. So let's smooth those edges, transfer that to our steel, and then cut those out. Okay, now we're going to use our magnets just to make sure it doesn't move on us. Fine point Sharpie marker. Okay, now we're gonna, this one we don't really have to flip over because it's a perfectly symmetrical part anyways, where those aren't. Okay, we're ready to cut these guys out. Well, actually I think first what I'll do, so another little fabricator tip for you guys, especially when you're cutting out oddball shapes like this, okay? Now what you could do is cut out each shape right now and then try and drill your holes later. The only problem is this part is really hard to hang on to, especially once you start drilling into it with a bigger drill bit, because the drill bit's gonna wanna catch and spin this thing around. Well, because there's no parallel edges on this whole part, you can't clamp it in a vise, at least not very successfully. And so what I would recommend is cut this chunk out as one chunk, drill or punch all your holes, deburr them, and then cut your pieces out. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, we're just gonna rough cut that as one blank right now. Now we're gonna go, we're gonna punch these holes. So we'll punch to the initial hole, and then, yeah, we should just be able to punch these. So let's go punch them. I gotta get some cutting fluid. All right, we got the cheater bar on our Rotex punch here. Actually, it's not a Rotex, it's a Diacro. So this thing is pretty beefy, man. This thing was built back in the day when they used to make real tools. It's got all different sizes. It's called a technical term, or the generic term is it's a Rotex, or a turret punch. So this has a turret that rotates, and so we want a 3/8 hole. That's what we want. So then you line up the corresponding numbers, 5 and 5. That station has a 3/8 hole in it. That's about the biggest you can go. You might be able to do a 1/2 inch, but we can for sure do a 3/8 hole punched into this 10 gauge steel. But you got to use a little bit of cutting fluid. So don't use WD-40. That doesn't work for this. WD-40 is not cutting fluid. WD-40 is a lubricating fluid. Okay? So you want to use a cutting fluid. There is a difference. Okay, so this is what you would use for tapping holes or machining stuff or whatever, but we're gonna use just a little bit on the die. Well, that was a lot. A little bit down there, a little bit up there, and then we want to put a little bit just around each hole. It's going to come out fast. You don't need much, just a little dab on each spot that we're going to punch. And that's going to save your tooling. Okay? All right. Watch this. So the top die has a little nipple on it that lines up perfect in our little prick punch. So you line that up and then you draw it down. I know this is kind of cheating. If you guys don't have one of these, I'm sorry, but otherwise you have to drill a hole. I hate drilling holes. This thing makes it so much easier. Watch this. Boom! Right through some 10 gauge. Look at that. Like butter. Man, that's so much easier than drilling holes. We'd still be firing up the drill press right now. Line it up, draw it down. Boom! That's faster than a laser right there. Boom! There we go, we got all of our holes punched. That took less than like 2 minutes. All right, now we can go finish cutting the rest of it out on the bandsaw. So we're gonna use a little bit of cutting fluid on this stuff as well. Whatever cutting fluid you use, just make sure it doesn't erase your lines. So some stuff will make your lines disappear. We don't want that, but this one doesn't do that. This is gonna help the blade cut so much better and make the blade last longer. These blades are expensive if you start going through them. They're about 50 bucks a piece. So, another little tip for you, fabrication tip. If you got a bandsaw, and you're going through a bunch of blades, slow the speed down. So, when I first got this thing, so you can see there's some teeth missing right there. See, that's what they're supposed to look like. Can you see that? But these right here are all ground off already. It's still cutting like a champ though. It's just 1, 2, skip a few, 1, 2, skip a few. This blade's been on here for, believe it or not, over a year, like maybe even 2 years, because I've just slowed it down, used some cutting fluid, make it last. When I first put blades on here, I was going through blades like crazy and I couldn't figure out why. And all it was the blade speed was too fast, and it was more than the blade could handle. So slow it down and the blade will last a lot longer. And it cuts fast, watch. I mean, you'll see it cuts pretty fast. That's not as fast as Send Cut Send laser cutting service, but that's pretty dang fast if you just need to make something right now. We didn't have to wait for the part, we just made it and it's done. Now in some cases, you know, if you got a real complex part that's got a lot of internal cutting and weird holes and stuff like that, sometimes it makes more sense to draw it in the computer and wait a couple of days. I mean, worst case, it'll be like a week and you'll have your part, but something like this, we need to keep rolling. This makes more sense. that operation. Now we're going to go over here to our berthing and put a Scotch-Brite belt on. That one's pretty toast right there.
See, this one made scratches going that way. Now we're going to flip it vertical and get the scratches going in the direction of the metal.
Still not gone. Now they're gone.
So now I just want to chamfer those holes a little bit. We'll do that by hand with a cordless drill, but basically that edge is done on that one. It's super smooth.
That is ready for powder coat right there. Okay. Now that's the way I was trained to do it back in the day, working at Rad Rides. That's how every bracket we did was like that. No excuses, no cutting corners.
Wipe off the parts, get some of the oil and water off of them. That way, that's a good chance to inspect them, make sure they look exactly like you want them to look. We still got to deburr them a little bit. See how nice those turned out? It looks like a laser cut part, except it wasn't. That's a cut by hand part. Alright, now we're going to countersink these, well, we're not really going to countersink them, we're just going to chamfer, which is the removal of a sharp edge, using a 1/2 inch drill and a 6 flute countersink. So you don't really want it real fast, you just want slow slow speed and a lot of pressure. Like that. Actually, I might even put it in low gear. Yeah, that's even better. We could do that on the drill press too. We really only need to do that one side. The other side's already kind of smushed in there from punching the hole. Sometimes if you go too fast, you end up with a bunch of chatter marks in there. See? No chatter marks. Let's take that one off. Now we got all 4 of our brackets made. For our roll cage landing pad on the front frame horns and core support.
Thank you for watching our latest video. If you guys would like to see more of what we have to offer here at HammerFab, such as our dimple dies, our bead roller dies, our assembly hammers, and everything else fabricated related, go to HammerFab.com. Thanks for watching.